with a vote of contempt. I guess this is the rule. No good deed goes unpunished. Attorney General Barr, maybe by a vote of contempt today by this committee, will learn the lesson that my late mama used to just say, there's some folks you just can't help. And with that, I will yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas seek recognition?
I have a lot of good friends, Mr. Chairman, including yourself, a lot of good friends on the other side of the aisle. And I'm simply trying to clarify the consistency of the false narrative that has continued as a theme of my friends on the other side of the aisle. Chairman Nadler has been consistent, and we've been consistent. We've had 3 elements to our request. It has been modified to the extent of Republicans and Democrats of the Intelligence and Judiciary Committee, specific documents that we could specify, and 6E materials is a part of it, operable under the law, either the Attorney General and DOJ walking into court with us saying what can be released, or not opposing when we go into court to get a court order. The false narrative that the whole premise is on trying to get grand jury materials, and I'm sure the redundancy of this has strained the imagination of the American people. What is 6E? It only means that documents used in a grand jury, like you'd be down in your own backyard and you had a grand jury for a criminal case, those materials are typically not seen. In this instance, because of the need for the thorough investigation we have from American people, we would use the courts. I want to move away from that. That is not the anchor of what we have requested. And then you cannot ignore the series of meetings and engagements that the staff has had. But what occurred in the last 24 hours was a Saturday night massacre of rejection. The DOJ stopped in its tracks of working with us. Can we understand that? They stopped in their tracks of working with us. And early in the morning, we received 2 letters dated May 8th simultaneously. There was no space to be able to engage in a discussion if you receive a letter of disappointment saying that we are not moving forward anymore. You have terminated our ongoing discussions and abandoned the accommodation. We're still engaged. Again, a Saturday night massacre of rejection. Simultaneously comes a letter that says we're going to ask for a blanket executive. What more do you think people who are fact finders can do? If our negotiating partner has turned the lights out and implemented Saturday night massacre with letters rejecting our honest attempt to negotiate. Then they want to use the words of Mr. Nadler. I'm glad that he is a gentleman that says that he has a right to change his mind, or he's been edified and he's always enlightened, and so he's gotten the light and seen the light, or has a different interpretation. That's just and fair. We say it in the open. But we have a colleague, Chairman Cummings, who's not here to defend himself. And so he was used to say that he's against subpoenas, and he said it 7 years ago. So let me just add into the record the words of the chairman of the Government Oversight Committee, Mr. Elijah Cummings. At the time of the Republican contempt vote 7 years ago, Attorney General Holder had already produced more than 7,000 pages of documents to our committee. To my knowledge, Attorney General Barr has refused to turn over any document. He went on to say the night before the contempt vote in 2012, and I remember this well, Attorney General Holder was really trying not to get a contempt vote. He found this particularly sensitive for his integrity, so he was working with the committee. Attorney General Holder personally came to meet with Chairman Issa and me and offered to provide copies of additional internal deliberative documents. Here, Attorney General Barr is blocking the production of the very documents that General Holder came forward to produce. He was like that in the Judiciary Committee as well. Then Attorney General Holder made a fair and reasonable offer to resolve the impasse after providing thousands of pages of documents and numerous interviews. Here, Attorney General Barr refused to even show up. So in 2012, Ranking Member Cummings did ask for a short delay to allow the committee to consider an 8-page legal document asserting executive privilege and an offer from General Holder to produce deliberative internal documents. Let us not establish a false narrative. There's apples and oranges from what happened in 2012. I would say to my colleagues, join us in this recognition that to do our job, we need the documents. Work with General Barr. If you cannot do that, then vote for the contempt citation. With that, I yield back my time.
The question is on the amendment. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. In the opinion, no. In the opinion of the chair, the nays have it, and the amendment is not agreed to. Are there any further amendments to the amendment in the nature of a substitute? The question occurs on the amendment in the nature of a substitute. Is it amended? As amended. I'll take the vote in a moment, but I will remind members that after the vote on the amendment in the nature of a substitute, there'll be a vote on final passage. All those in favor of the amendment in the nature of a substitute as amended respond by saying aye. 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 Opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment in the nature of a substitute is agreed to. A reporting quorum being present, the question is on the motion to report the committee report for a resolution recommending that the House of Representatives find William P. Barr, Attorney General of the United States Department of Justice, in contempt for refusal to comply with a subpoena duly issued by the Committee on the Judiciary as amended favorably to the House. Those in favor respond by saying aye. 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 Opposed, no.
No.
And the ayes have it.
Roll call,
Committee
Mr.
report.
Chairman.
The roll call is requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Nadler?
Aye.
Mr. Nadler votes aye. Ms. Lofgren? Ms. Jackson-Lee? Ms. Jackson-Lee votes aye. Mr. Cohen? Mr. Johnson of Georgia? Mr. Johnson of Georgia votes aye. Mr. Deutsch? Mr. Deutsch votes aye. Ms. Bass? Ms. Bass votes aye.
What?
Mr. Richmond?
Oh, really?
Mr. Jeffries?
Aye.
Jeffries votes aye. Mr. Cicilline?
Aye.
Mr. Cicilline votes aye. Mr. Swalwell?
Aye.
Mr. Swalwell votes aye. Mr. Liu? Mr. Liu votes aye. Mr. Raskin? Aye. Mr. Raskin votes aye. Ms. Jayapal? Ms. Stemmings? Ms. Stemmings votes aye. Mr. Correa? Aye. Mr. Correa votes aye. Ms. Scanlon? Aye. Ms. Scanlon votes aye. Ms. Garcia?
Aye.
Ms. Garcia votes aye. Mr. Neguse? Mr. Neguse votes aye. Ms. McBath? Ms. McBath votes aye. Mr. Stanton?
Aye.
Mr. Stanton votes aye. Ms. Dean?
Aye.
Ms. Dean votes aye. Ms. Mucarsel-Powell?
Aye.
Ms. Mucarsel-Powell votes aye. Ms. Escobar?
Aye.
Ms. Escobar votes aye. Mr. Collins?
No.
Mr. Collins votes no. Mr. Sensenbrenner? No. Mr. Sensenbrenner votes no. Mr. Shabbat?
No.
Mr. Shabbat votes no. Mr. Gomert? Mr. Gomert votes no. Mr. Jordan? No. Mr. Jordan votes no. Mr. Buck? No. Mr. Buck votes no. Mr. Ratcliffe? No. Mr. Ratcliffe votes no. Ms. Roby? Ms. Roby votes no. Mr. Gates? Mr. Johnson of Louisiana? No. Mr. Johnson of Louisiana votes no. Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes no. Mr. McClintock? No. Mr. McClintock votes no. Ms. Lesko?
No.
Ms. Lesko votes no. Mr. Reschenthaler? Mr. Reschenthaler votes no. Mr. Klein?
No.
Mr. Klein votes no. Mr. Armstrong? Mr. Armstrong votes no. Mr. Stubbe? Mr. Stubbe votes no.
Has everyone who wishes to be recorded been recorded? Has the gentleman from Tennessee been recorded? Does the gentleman from Tennessee wish to be recorded? Yes. How does the gentleman from Tennessee wish to be recorded?
Well, we're establishing a record on that.
Mr. Cohen votes aye.
We have two more people coming
Mr. Chairman.
in the middle of a roll call.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Georgia.
After all the eloquent speech today and we're talking, I forgot, am I recorded?
Mr. Collins, you're recorded as no.
Thank you. I'll consider it be a no.
Madam Clerk, how am I recorded?
Mr. Nadler, you're recorded as aye.
I wish to be recorded as aye.
Chairman,
The gentlelady from Texas.
how am I recorded?
Ms. Jackson Lee, you are recorded as aye.
I think that's correct. Thank you.
Gentleman from Ohio. How is the gentleman from Ohio recorded?
Mr. Shabbat, you're recorded as no.
Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from Rhode Island.
Mr. Chairman, is it appropriate for us to enter in a colloquy or in the middle of a vote or no?
It's the middle of a vote.
Then how am I recorded? That was what I was going to ask.
Mr. Cicilline, you're recorded as aye.
Thank you. That is correct.
Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from Louisiana.
Mr. Richmond votes aye.
How many more do we have?
Mr. Chairman.
Who seeks the gentleman from Maryland.
Could the clerk please tell me how I'm recorded?
Mr. Raskin, you're recorded as aye.
Thank you very much.
Who seeks recognition? How is Mr. Johnson of Louisiana recorded?
Mr. Johnson of Louisiana, you are recorded as no.
We for the benefit of members and everyone else present, we have two members coming back from a hearing. We're going to hold the vote open until they get here momentarily.
Okay, never mind.
We're going to hold the vote open until they get here momentarily, hopefully momentarily. People don't have to keep asking how they recorded. We'll. On this vote, everybody should be able to be recorded. The gentlelady from California?
Ms. Lofgren votes aye.
The gentlelady from Washington?
Ms. Jayapal votes aye.
And the two of you are very welcome to cast your votes. Has anyone else who wishes to vote not voted yet? The clerk will report. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, there are 24 ayes and 16 noes.
The ayes have it, and the committee report as amended is ordered reported favorably to the House. I now recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pursuant to Clause 2L of Rule 11, I hereby give notice of intent to file dissenting views for the inclusion into the report.
The notice is duly noted. Members will have 2 days to submit views. The committee report will be reported as a single amendment in the nature of a substitute, incorporating all adopted amendments, and without objection, staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes. This concludes our business for today. Thanks to all of our members for attending. Without objection, the markup is adjourned.